The Late Show studio was already tense before the cameras turned on. Not chaotic, not loud, just tense in the way that happens when everyone in the room knows something might go wrong, and no one's sure who will pull the trigger. Karoline Leavitt was scheduled to appear as the sole guest for an extended segment. It had been pitched as a discussion about young voices in politics, the next generation of leadership. But that was just the version the public saw. Behind the scenes, there were emails, conditions, and warnings. Karoline Leavitt had only agreed to appear if the conversation stayed substantive. That meant no personal attacks about her age, no mockery, and no attempts to turn her into a punchline for Colbert's liberal audience. Stephen Colbert's producers had agreed, or at least they said they had. But just minutes before they walked onto the set, one of the writers changed the cue cards, and Karoline's team saw them being distributed. When she finally stepped onto the stage, the applause was polite but cool. People were clapping out of obligation, not enthusiasm. Karoline waved to the crowd once, then sat. Colbert was already smiling, too widely. He leaned forward first. Colbert said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Karoline Leavitt. At 27, the youngest White House press secretary in history. Though I'm not sure if that's an achievement or child labor." Already, the shots fired. The audience laughed. Karoline kept her composure, but her eyes sharpened. She said, "Nice to see you too, Stephen. Though I'd point out that youth didn't stop JFK or Theodore Roosevelt from being effective." Colbert pressed on. "Right, but they had experience. You were basically in high school when Trump was first elected. What qualifies you to speak for the most powerful office in the world?" Karoline's jaw tightened. She said, "What qualifies you to joke about it? We both talk for a living. The difference is I deal in facts while you deal in punchlines." The audience had a mixed reaction. Some oohed. Others seemed taken aback by her directness. Colbert leaned back, his smile turning sharper. "Facts. Is that what we're calling the creative fiction that came out of Trump's press room?" Karoline sat straighter. She said, "I came here to have a serious discussion. If you just want to do your comedy routine, you don't need me for that." Colbert wouldn't let up. "But you're so good at providing material. Remember when you said the economy was the best it's ever been while people couldn't afford groceries?" "I cited employment statistics and GDP growth," Karoline shot back. "Just because you don't like the numbers doesn't make them false." Colbert smirked. "Oh, honey, you can't just throw around big words and expect." "Don't call me honey," Karoline interrupted sharply. "I'm not your daughter. I'm a professional who deserves the same respect you'd give any guest." The atmosphere shifted. This wasn't the easy target Colbert expected. He doubled down. "Respect? You want respect? You spent months defending the indefensible. You lied to the American people with a smile." Karoline's composure started cracking. She said, "I presented the administration's position. That's literally the job. Just like your job is apparently to belittle young women who disagree with you." The audience grew quiet. This was getting uncomfortable. Colbert's voice turned condescending. "Oh, are we playing the gender card now? How very millennial of you." That's when Karoline stood up. Not slowly. Suddenly. She said, "Gender card? Age card? You've done nothing but attack my age and gender since I sat down. You haven't asked one substantive question." Colbert stood too, his TV charm evaporating. "Maybe because there's no substance to question." "Stop." Karoline's voice filled the studio. "Just stop. I know what this is. You can't debate my policies, so you attack my person. You can't refute my work, so you mock my age." She turned to the audience. "This is what they do. They bring on young conservatives, especially women, to humiliate us, to make you feel superior, to turn us into your entertainment. Now, what you're about to see is why they tried to bury this footage. This is a young woman refusing to be their punching bag, and it terrifies them. If you want to keep seeing these unfiltered moments of truth, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't wait. They're already trying to get this taken down. Subscribe now and join thousands who refuse to accept their edited version of reality. Be part of the resistance against media manipulation. Now watch what made them panic." Colbert tried to regain control. "If you can't handle tough questions." "Tough questions?" Karoline exploded. "You haven't asked a single question about policy, about legislation, about anything that matters. It's all been personal attacks." Her voice rose with each word, genuine fury breaking through. "You want to know what's really going on? You're threatened. You're threatened by young conservatives who don't fit your stereotype. who can articulate positions without apologizing, who don't need your approval. Colbert's face reddened. You're embarrassing yourself. No, you're embarrassing yourself. Karoline shouted. You used to be a satirist who punched up at power. Now you're just a bully who punches down at anyone who threatens your worldview. She grabbed her notes from the desk and threw them down. You know what? I'm done. I'm done pretending this is an interview. Done pretending you're a journalist. Done pretending this is anything other than a hit job. Colbert's voice turned nasty. If you can't take the heat. The heat. Karoline laughed bitterly. This isn't heat. This is harassment. This is a middle-aged man mocking a young woman for daring to succeed in his world. The audience was completely silent now, shocked by the raw emotion. She continued, her voice shaking with rage. You claim to support women, but only liberal women. You claim to champion youth, but only liberal youth. Anyone else is fair game for your cruelty. Colbert said coldly. I think you should leave. Oh, I'm leaving, Karoline said. But first, let me tell you something your audience needs to hear. This man, who presents himself as moral arbiter, who acts like he's speaking truth to power, he's just another gatekeeper trying to keep young voices out. She looked directly at the camera. To every young conservative watching, this is what they think of you. This is how they see you. As a joke. As something to be destroyed for laughs. Security started approaching. Karoline's voice got louder. They don't want dialogue. They want dominance. They don't want diversity of thought. They want conformity. As security reached her, she delivered her final blow. You're not a comedian, Stephen. You're not a truth teller. You're a propagandist. A bitter propagandist who can't stand that the future doesn't look like you. Security grabbed her arms. She struggled against them. Don't touch me. I know how to walk. As they escorted her out, she shouted over her shoulder. This is why people hate the media. This is why trust is gone. Because of people like you. Her final words before being pushed through the door. History will remember who built bridges and who burned them. And you're holding the matches. The studio doors slammed shut. Colbert stood on his stage, visibly rattled. The audience sat in stunned silence. And what happened next would become the most explosive aftermath in late show history. After Karoline's forced exit, the studio remained in shocked silence. Colbert stood at his desk, trying to compose himself, but his usual smirk was gone. The audience didn't know how to react. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others were rapidly texting. Everyone was processing what they'd just witnessed. Colbert finally managed. Well, that was unexpected. A voice from the audience called out. She was right, though. Colbert turned, genuinely surprised. I'm sorry. A young woman stood up. She said, she was right. You didn't ask her one real question. It was all attacks on her age and gender. Another audience member joined in. Yeah, that honey comment was way out of line. More voices emerged. Why did you bring her on just to insult her? This was supposed to be an interview, not a roast. She's accomplished more at 27 than most of us ever will. Colbert tried to joke it off. Well, I guess some people can't handle. Handle what? A man stood up. Being disrespected on national television? Would you handle it better? The audience was fracturing. Some defended Colbert, others sided with Karoline. Arguments broke out. Meanwhile, backstage, Karoline hadn't left the building. Security had released her in the hallway, where she stood shaking with adrenaline. Several crew members had gathered around her. A young production assistant said quietly, "That was incredible. He does this to every young conservative. You're just the first to fight back." A camera operator added, "The honey comment was disgusting. Even for him. You had every right to go off." Karoline looked at them, tears of frustration in her eyes. She said, "I came here to show that young conservatives are serious people with serious ideas." And he turned it into this. Back on stage, Colbert had cut to commercial early. When they returned, he tried to continue with a comedy segment, but his heart wasn't in it. The jokes fell flat. The audience energy was completely wrong. He attempted to address what happened. "Look, sometimes interviews get heated." Someone shouted. That wasn't an interview. It was character assassination. More audience disruption. The taping was falling apart. Within minutes of Karoline's exit, the footage was everywhere. Hashtag Karoline Leavitt was right exploded across social media. Karoline, still in the CBS building, posted a video on Instagram. Raw, unfiltered, still emotional. She said, "I just walked off Stephen Colbert's show. Or rather, I was forced off. Because I refused to sit there and be mocked for my age and gender. Because I demanded to be treated like a professional rather than a punchline. She paused, steadying herself. They brought me on under the pretense of discussing young leadership. Instead, I got jokes about child labor and being called honey. This is what young conservative women face. Not debate. Not disagreement. Dismissal. She looked directly at the camera. To every young woman, regardless of politics, who's been told you're too young, too inexperienced, too whatever, don't accept it. Demand respect, even if it means walking off their stage. The video had 40 million views in 3 hours. Colbert tried damage control in his monologue, calling Karoline thin-skinned and clearly not ready for prime time. This backfired catastrophically. The clips comparing his treatment of young liberal guests versus conservatives went viral. The pattern was undeniable and damning. Conservative media rallied around Karoline, but surprisingly, so did many feminists. A prominent women's rights activist tweeted, "I disagree with everything Karoline Leavitt stands for politically, but watching a grown man call a professional woman honey and mock her age on national TV? That's misogyny, period." Within 48 hours, The Late Show lost 2 major sponsors, both companies with young female CEOs who released statements about supporting respectful dialogue. But the bigger impact was generational. Young professionals, especially women, shared their own stories of being dismissed for their age. Hashtag Don't Call Me Honey became a rallying cry. A week later, Karoline appeared on a podcast to discuss the incident. She was calm, articulate, thoughtful. She said, "I'm not proud that I lost my temper, but I'm not sorry either. Sometimes the only response to disrespect is righteous anger. They expected me to sit there and take it with a smile. That expectation is part of the problem." The host asked, "Would you go back on the show?" Karoline replied, "Only if Stephen agrees to treat young guests with the same respect he gives to Hollywood celebrities. So probably not." The Late Show's ratings took a significant hit, especially among younger viewers. CBS received thousands of complaints about the interview. 3 months later, at a media conference, Colbert was pressed about the incident. He said, "Look, comedy is supposed to push boundaries." A young reporter interrupted, "Is calling a professional woman honey comedy or just condescension?" Colbert had no good answer. The footage of Karoline being escorted out by security became a defining moment in discussions about ageism and sexism in media. Universities used it in journalism classes as an example of how not to conduct an interview. Karoline leveraged the moment into a successful media career, becoming known for her composure under fire and her refusal to be patronized. She never brought up the Colbert incident unless asked, and then would simply say, "It was a learning experience. I learned that respect isn't given freely in media. Sometimes you have to demand it, even if that means being dragged off stage." Especially then. A year later, The Late Show quietly announced a new booking policy emphasizing respectful dialogue with all guests. They never explicitly connected it to the Karoline incident, but everyone knew. In her book published 2 years later, Karoline wrote, "That night on Colbert taught me something valuable. The establishment media doesn't fear conservative ideas as much as they fear young people who can articulate them without apology. My youth wasn't a weakness, it was a threat. And when you're a threat, sometimes the best thing you can do is refuse to play by their rules, even if security has to escort you out." The incident became known as the night Karoline snapped, but in reality, it was the night she refused to be snapped in half by a system designed to break young challengers. She didn't just get forced to leave Stephen Colbert's show. She forced America to confront its treatment of young professionals, especially young conservative women. And in being dragged out, she dragged into the light something that needed exposing. That sometimes the comedians are the real joke, and the punchlines are people's dignity.